Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another very special edition of WOWSA Live with our host, Ned Dennison.
Hello, everyone. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have one of our honorees with us today, Marilyn Bell. Will you please say hello, Marilyn?
Hi, everybody. It's Marilyn, sending you all good wishes, whatever time it is in your world. And I'm so happy to be here. Nice to meet you, Ned. I'm sorry, and Steve.
We're going to sneak up on why you're so famous. But first, tell us about your early swimming. You had a coach, an honoree, Coach Gus, and he also did some work with disabled children, which I think is quite interesting. So talk to us about those early years, if you would.
Yeah, okay. Well, Gus was actually my third coach, but fortunately I had Ernst Bierkotter, who's also an honoree. He kind of fit in the middle for me before I went to Gus. And there's a fun story, maybe we can share that later on. But when I met Gus, I was only 11 years old. And he saw me swim a mile in the lake. I had been tutored and mentored by Winnie Roach Loosler, who was the first Canadian woman to do the channel. And so I swam in this mile race and placed 9th. The water was 49 degrees. And I couldn't believe it. I had never been so cold in my life. But that was the first race that I had. And all of the competitors were senior women over 18. And of course, I was just an add-on, and I was, I guess, 11. And they all waited on the barge for me, freezing cold, because they were so excited about this little kid that wouldn't stop. And so I met Gus that day. And the first thing he said to me after he said his name was, you know, you have a big heart for a little girl. And if you keep swimming, you're going to do really, really well. And with that, my dad was so well, I was thrilled too, but my dad was so thrilled because he changed the whole idea that my first coach had about competitive swimming, short races, which I, didn't do well at all. And so as a result, my dad talked to Gus later, and I joined the Lakeshore Swimming Club around my 12th birthday. Gus had a rule. Every club member, every team member had to be a lifesaver. So we had to learn all the rigors and the levels of Royal Life Saving, which was great because that was that UK connection. And he also was a pioneer in working with primarily disabled children, but he did work with adults too, with disabled adults. So when I was, I guess, 13 maybe, he told me that he thought I was ready to learn how to teach his disabled swimmers. I was already working with, full-bodied kids. And so that was my first introduction to dealing with children that were wonderful. I was afraid. I was petrified that I would say something wrong or do something wrong, and he worked with me. He mentored me through that fear piece. And what I discovered was, hey, we're all alike in here. And it was really it was such an eye-opening thing for me at such a young age. So ever since then, I've always been involved in some way with some kind of adaptive aquatics, and also in my school teaching as well. But it was Gus. It was Gus that planted that seed. And I vividly remember the first time he said to me, okay, I have a young girl who I want you to meet. She, I can't remember her name now, but she was about my size actually. And he said, and she is about your size. So I don't want you to be afraid of dealing with someone, that's the same size as you, because you're going to do fine. And what he neglected to tell me, that she had been born without arms. So when I met her in the water, he brought her into the water, and then I met her, and I was shocked. How do I do this? What am I going to do? She has no arms. You've got to have arms to swim. No, you don't have to have arms to swim. So he helped, you know, he really showed me by doing with her what he wanted me to do with her. And he had already built trust with her. So he you know, he said, okay, so just lean back and my arms are on your body and I will hold you up. And she did, because she trusted him. And then that's how he started. And, but when I took over, she still hadn't learned to float. That was my job, but it was all about, I had to build trust. I had to do something to get her to trust me. Eventually she did, didn't take long. And practically in no time, I had her floating and kicking on her legs. And, you know, every time we worked together, she'd go a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. And then eventually she swam full length of the pool on her own with me side stroking beside her. So that was really my first, I just loved it. I just loved the idea of discovering people that had not perfect bodies, but were so wise and smart and intuitive inside, you know? And for me, anytime I was instructing, I would always choose those kids as opposed to my able-bodied kids that, you know, they just got it so easily, most of them. And then when I started my teaching career, I decided I really wanted to work with special needs kids. So that's what I took my master's in. And I followed through on that. So it was interesting how that first experience with Gus and the adaptive aquatics, before we used the word adapted aquatics, how that seed kind of grew and blossomed as I grew and hopefully blossomed.
I think it would be wonderful if every swimmer at about age 13 gave something back to the sport or society. It might be a really good way for people to get a grounding.
And he was also teaching that. He was, you know, he was doing that already. And so I grew up thinking, wasn't even thinking about it. It's just what we did. And my early experience around the same period of time, just before I met Gus, was with another swimmer, Winnie Roach-Leusler, who was the first Canadian to swim across the channel. And, but I met her in 1949. She was the one that I swam my first mile with in the lake, petrified. I was afraid of fish. I knew there were lampreys in there, which they told me weren't fish at all, but that did not matter. And it was murky and dark, you know, even in the sunlight, it was murky and dark. I was petrified. So she had said, my dad and I had met her and her father walking along the waterfront as we were watching the pro swimmers swim, which Daddy and I did probably for the whole month of August, you know, because they'd all come to Canada for the big swims. And so that's how I met Winnie. And she happened to say to me, have you ever swum in Lake Ontario? And I said, oh, no. I just swim in the pool. And my dad volunteered. I had just done my first mile in the pool. And she said, well, we have to get you in the water. We need to get you in the lake. You're going to love it. So the next, she said, come back tomorrow. If you can come back after I finish my training, I will swim with you. Again, it was this amazing athlete who already had accomplished a lot, but not the channel yet. And she was giving back. She was taking a kid who was scared to death. And I owe so much to that woman. Who would have believed that we swam our first mile together, almost in the same place where I finished my lake swim. Unfortunately, she didn't get to finish that swim. I think she swam 18 miles. But who would have ever thought that the two of us would be in Lake Ontario in 1954 with the great Florence Chadwick, and it all started because of that little kid that she took in the water.
Before we get to the big swim, I also have this memory of you being kind of a roadie or a groupie for these marathon swimmers at the famous CNE. Tell us about those years. Tell us about the personalities. What was your job to throw them towels? What is it you did around these famous swimmers?
And that all became, that all happened because of my father. My father couldn't swim. My mother could swim. In fact, she went to Ernst Vierkotter initially, as I think when she first started working, she was probably about 20, to learn to swim, but I never saw either one of them swim. But Daddy loved to go down and watch the professional swimmers. For the good part of the month of August, they would come from all over the world to swim professional, to make money. That was part of how they made their living. And so Daddy would, once I got into this swimming, and actually that was how we came to meet Winnie and her dad. So Daddy and I would walk back and forth, watching them train. And then of course there was at that time, I think the men's swim was, I think it was a 15-mile, probably a 15-mile swim. And then it may have come, maybe it was always 15 miles in that time frame, 1949, 50. That's that's a beeping thing. I don't know what to do with it. I'll ignore it. Anyway, maybe you're not hearing it, I hope. So anyway, as a result of us walking back and forth, the women and the men began to see us as familiar figures. And then once I joined Lakeshore Swimming Club, of course, Cliff Lumsden was our big swimming star, and also an honoree. And he and I would swim together, but I mean, that was really a joke. He would swim with me, trying to make me go faster. So of course, I would be there, with his towels and his nutrition, whatever it was he was using when he was training. And so I got to know all these wonderful gentlemen and women, but mostly the men. The women were kind of off, they were doing their own thing, but the men, I don't know what it was, maybe because I was just a little kid and, I would get their towels when they got out of the water, or there was always they didn't serve food at this tent, but for the swimmers, there was a drink called, I think, Ovaltine. And so you could always get hot Ovaltine. And of course, the water was always cold and they'd be freezing when they got out. So I would be the kid that'd bring them their Ovaltine. And then it was just, they knew me by name. They were always very kind to me, and they made me feel very comfortable to be around. It was like, my dad used to say, don't be a pest, don't be a pest.
Connect us with the names, Marilyn. I remember you mentioned Bill Gall once.
I made a list, but I'm going to see if I can remember. So the first name that pops in my head is Steve Wozniak. And I was kind of afraid of Steve at first because he was kind of a burly, furry, he always had a
truck driver from Buffalo.
Yeah, from Buffalo. And so I was a little nervous about even talking to him, but he was a superstar. He really was in the water, but he was also just a kind guy. So, and the two Bills, Bill Sadlow and Bill Gall, again, they were, I don't know if it was because maybe they missed their families because they were up training and getting ready or what, but they just received me. They were very receptive to my being around. Who else? Well, of course, Cliff, but that was kind of a no-brainer by then. I got to look up my list.
1, 2, 3 of the Parks.
Oh, well, yeah, Tom Park, and I knew Tom before we met again in Atlantic City, but and George Park, he wasn't swimming open water then. He was on the competitive route. He swam for Hamilton, so I was in love with him as a young kid, even a teenager, until I fell in love with the lifeguard. But every girl that swam in the Ontario circuit was in love with George Park. He was gorgeous, and he was so nice to those of us who weren't superstars, and I was not a superstar. I was definitely not a superstar. So Tom and George and Margaret. I didn't know Margaret really well, but I knew she, she was part of that group. And who else? Patty Thompson, she and I swam. I was older than her, but she's an honoree. And I think her dad, Jimmy, he was a coach in Hamilton. And he, by the way, he also did a lot of good work with disabled children in the water. He and Gus were really I think, the eastern part of Canada, they were considered the pioneers. So so Patty, I used to see Patty, but I was, I think, about 7 years older than her. And then, of course, later, I met Greta Anderson. I never swam with her, but I certainly met her. And we had a wonderful reunion in San Pedro. When I met you, Ned, the first time I met you. It was, oh my gosh, when she came in the room and we saw each other from across the room, and it was like we were both weaving, trying to get through people to get, and she held my hand, except when we were sitting at different tables, she held my hand the whole time. It was just so good to see her. And,
tell us how you ended up in Atlantic City for this big world championship.
Okay.
Did you have any idea this was happening, or they just put you on a plane and next thing you know, you were in Atlantic City?
No, I wanted to do that. Cliff got the application and he was really excited. And of course he showed it to me and I thought, wow, I wonder if I could, because it was advertised as a 26-mile swim in those days. They shortened the island now, but anyway, I said to Gus, do you think I could swim 26 miles? And he kind of looked at me and said, I think you could swim whatever you want. You just would have to put your mind to it and stay focused and work hard. And I said, so do you think maybe I could go to Atlantic City? He said, well, that's not really for me to say. That would be between you and your parents, but do I think you could do it? Well, we have a little bit of time. We've got a few months. So yeah, it's in your, ball's in your court, Marilyn. He used to tell me that all the time. The ball is in your court. So I guess Cliff must have had that application like early spring, perhaps. And that was the year that the Canadian National Exhibition was changing everything about swimming. They were no longer going to have the men's individual 15-mile. They weren't going to have the women's 3-mile professional swims, which I had been counting on because that was the only place in Ontario you could go to swim a mile competitively. And it happened, once a year. So they weren't going to do that. Instead, they were going to run a relay, I guess it could be a men and women's relay. And then that was when they decided they would invite Florence Chadwick to come to do a solo swim. And of course, that created all kinds of controversy because even in Atlantic City, when I got to Atlantic City, that was the topic. The swimmers, American swimmers, European swimmers, swimmers from South America, they were all, the Egyptians, they were all angry over the change in the change in plan. Anyway, come late spring when we started out in the swimming outdoors, I kept saying to Gus, I'm really trying, I'm really working hard. Do you think I could do it? Do you think I could do it? And he finally said, well, you have to do a 10-hour swim to prove that you can do it. If you can do a 10-hour swim, then I would say yes. So time passed and there wasn't anybody around that had the time to go out with me for 10 hours. And we were right down to the end of the application, I think had to be in like on July 1st. And my dad had said, okay, I can take like June 29th off and I'll come and I'll row the boat. Well, that fell through. Then the 30th came and the night of the 29th, my dad said, I'm sorry, but I can't take off work. I can come later, but I can't take off work. I said, okay, that's all right. I'm going to do it. So I packed all my food up in 10 jars, took the streetcar, then took the bus, then took another streetcar, and then another bus. And I got out to the river in Port Credit after about an hour and a half. And I had my bathing suit on, and I had my kit bag, you know, with my little jars of food, which was pablum and corn syrup. You know, that was no protein, just carbs. So I knew that the boatman where we always rented our boats, he was there. I don't think he ever went home. So when I got off the last bus and trudged up the road to the river, to the bank, down to go down to find him, he was there repairing stuff. And I said, okay, so listen, I have to swim 10 hours and my dad's going to come later, but he's going to be late. So I have my food. And I was wondering if would you be able to just whistle for me every hour and I could swim into the dock and get my food? And he said, well, who's going to be with you in the boat? I said, nobody. Me, afraid of fish, the whole bit, you know. I said, nobody, but I have to do it. So the course it was about a 1/4 mile course, but he could see me in that course because I had to swim from a highway to a railroad bridge and then turn and come back. So I was within sight of the dock and he was within sight of me. So I swam for about 7.5 hours by myself. He would whistle, I'd come in, and I think along about the 5th hour, I was starting to do this conversation. I used to have this conversation between the quitter and the fighter. And oh my gosh, the quitter was really talking up a storm. And I was feeling very sorry for myself. Here I am all by myself. If Gus had known, he would have had a heart attack because we weren't supposed to ever swim alone. And there I was. Anyway, Daddy got there around the 8th hour. And I was so thrilled when I saw him, you know, rowing the boat toward me. And so then Gus got there around the 9th hour after work, and I was still swimming. And he said to the boatman, how long has she been swimming? And he told him. And then the boatman said, and you should know, she did it all by herself. And then, you know, the cat was out of the bag. So I caught the dickens from him for doing that. On the other hand, he said, you know what? You're going to be fine. If you can swim that long by yourself, talking yourself into swimming and continuing, you're going to be good. So that's how I got to Atlantic City.
Was it your first, did you fly down?
It was the first flight. I flew with Cliff and his girlfriend Joan, who was also one of my dear friends, and his mom. So it was the 4 of us that flew down, and Jim Toomey, of course, he's an honoree. I just remembered. He met us at the airport or at the bus station because we flew in, I think, to LaGuardia, took a bus, long trip, but it was a fun trip. Anything that I did with Cliff and Joan was fun, you know. And Jim.
And did you notice that you had gambling in Atlantic City, or was your 16-year eye just focused on the lifeguards?
No. There was no gambling then. That came.
Lifeguards?
No, there was lifeguards galore, all good looking, bronze, blonde hair. Yeah. And the first day I went to the beach, Jim took us. Jim and his wife Mary took us to the beach. We rented a house right across from the Drexel Avenue lifeguard tent, so it was perfect. And but he came to introduce us. He wanted to introduce us to the captain, and the captain, he was a darling man. He adopted me immediately. It was he was such fun and so good to me. And actually, he was very good to. He loved the gentleman that became my husband, Chip Delacio, and although the captain always called him Chipper, so that's how I met him, as Chipper. I always called him Chipper. And anyway, he introduced us to the guards at the station. And there was only one that I just thought was gorgeous. He had 115 on his shirt. And of course, I later learned, when I met him, I was like, oh my God, he's the one. He's wonderful. I love him. And hey, he just finished his freshman year in college. He was not interested in a 16-year-old girl who was afraid of fish. but he got interested eventually.
So the Atlantic City swim you completed in 10 hours and 7 minutes or something.
Yeah.
You were the first female home. I won't call you a woman at this point because you were 16. First female home. You took at least 3 scalps of honorees who finished: Mr. Sadlow, Baptiste Piera, and
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Bill Gall.
Uh-huh.
And at least one honoree male didn't finish, Jerry.
Uh-huh. Just say Jerry.
Say Jerry. Apparently you had he was trying to psych you out before the swim, and you had a word or two with him towards the middle.
Yeah, well, he was, because before the swim, you know, I was like this. I looked like a little kid, and people kept saying, "You're these big burly guys that didn't know me." Well, even if some of them that did know me would say, "What do you mean you're good? Did you ever swim 26 miles?" I said, "No," and "Oh, you're not. No. You need to be the cheerleader. You be the mascot." And the morning of the swim, actually, Jerry. The night before, my dad realized he had forgotten. He had driven with my mom down to Atlantic City. He had forgotten to bring the chalkboard that Gus would use, you know, for communication. So my dad, the night before the swim, he went out every bar in town trying to get a chalkboard because everything was closed. And he finally conned a bartender into selling him. I don't know what he paid for it, but this was this just a big ass chalkboard. But on the back, it had the world map as it was in 1954. And when my dad brought it to the boat, at the beach, because we left from Steel Pier, so the boats were loading right at Steel Pier, which was very convenient. So I walked down with my dad, with whatever stuff I needed, and he's carrying this big chalkboard. And then that's when everybody's like, "Really? You think it's going to be a big swim and you're going to get lost?" And the chalkboard set everything off. And then my friend Jerry started making really not pleasant cracks about I had no business to be there and I should be home in Canada swimming with the kids, and the whole thing. What I didn't realize was somehow Gertrude Ederle, who was the starter, must have heard that conversation, because just before we were all lined up on Steel Pier, and I have a photograph, a grainy newspaper photograph of all the competitors, and Jerry was over there. I was standing next to her. She had her arm on me because I had been introduced to her. And of course, because I was woman and the youngest, I think she was interested. And again, somebody who would give back, to her community. Anyway, so she took me aside and she said, before I swam the English Channel, nobody thought I could do it. I was the only one that thought I could do it. And I was pretty sure that I could. But there was, always that little bit of doubt. She said, but I think what you need to do is you need to swim your hardest today, show everybody that you can swim 26 miles, and then next year, I expect you to swim the channel. And I was like, wow. She said, so you just got to believe in you, and off you go, and good luck, and I'll be watching you. And I later got a letter from one of the officials that had been on the boat, the official's boat, the boat that Trudy had taken around as she was watching the swim. I didn't see her at the end, but it was a very nice comment that she made about me in this letter, that she had had this conversation with the woman, the official. Anyway, so with that, I really felt good. I really thought about what she told me. It's because Gus was always saying, the ball's in your court, Marilyn. You're in charge of it. You can do it or you can't do it, but it's going to be up to you. I'm not doing it. And after I think, we swam the ocean front, and then we made the tricky turn into Longport. And I wasn't way back in the pack. I think at that point I was probably around 8th maybe or 9th, but I knew I was leading the women, and that was the thing. I really wanted to be, you know what? I wanted to be a winner for the first time in my life. I wanted to win something. And so once we rounded the point and left the ocean and we were swimming in the back bay, Gus kept, each time I passed a man, he would say, 1 down, 1 more coming up, 2 down. And this went on until we finally got to, I was coming up behind Jerry, and Gus stopped me and he said, okay, that guy up there, that's Jerry, you know who. And you need to do something about that. Remember what he told you. And oh man, I was just gunning for him. I swam and so hard. I think I worked that patch. I worked really hard to catch him. And then just as I approached him, I was like parallel to him. Gus stopped me. He said, okay, Marilyn, yelling my name. Marilyn, it's time to eat. And it wasn't really time to eat, but he wanted me to he wanted to send a message. And Jerry stopped and he looked and he heard and he saw me. And as we were swimming, I was swimming away, Gus heard the guys in his boat say, are you going to let a little girl beat you? And he was crushed apparently, and he got in the boat. So
as an older man, I know the part of the story you're missing. He got injured at that point, Marilyn, and had to retire.
I'm sure
It had nothing to do with psychologically. I'm sure he hurt his left arm on a wave. That must be the story.
That was the highlight. Honest to God, that was the highlight of my swim until I got to Still Pier, and then I kind of forgot about it. And then I did see him later, and I don't remember. I'm sure we shook hands, but yeah. But yeah, and then he actually was in the across the lake swim. As he was on a relay team, but he decided he wasn't going to. He just dropped out of the relay team and decided he wanted to swim before Chadwick could get across. So he started, I think, about 8 hours before we did, and he was pulled out. I mean, he put on a good showing because he was a great swimmer.
So bring us to the setup of this whole. You keep referring to this mysterious Florence Chadwick woman in this big swim. You're 16 years old. You're back in Canada, and the big highlight of the swimming season is going to be the world famous American Florence Chadwick, who's going to come over and show you Canadians how to swim that big lake.
Right.
Is that a reasonable setup?
Yeah, it is. But it wasn't that. You know, I knew what an incredible swimmer. I knew her history. She was one of my heroes, for heaven's sake. So it wasn't a case of her not being capable of doing it. I don't think. Well, I didn't know that she could do it. Because I didn't have a whole lot of faith in the fact that. Well, I knew I couldn't do it, but I figured anybody that could do it would probably be Winnie. Yeah, maybe Winnie, maybe Florence, and maybe one of the men, possibly, but it was going to be a solo swim, and there was so much controversy. The controversy built from April, when the announcement was made, in April of '54, right up to the race day. People were still fighting about it, and then. But what I did not know at the time, in fact, I didn't know until years and years later when I started reading newspaper clippings long after I retired, that my coach, Gus Ryder, was determined. Well, first of all, he believed in Canadian youth. He believed that we always allowed ourselves to take a second back seat or something, I guess, especially to Americans. He had this real patriotic piece in him about Canada, which was a good thing because he built so many champions and good leaders. So anyway, he was working behind the scenes for months, trying to drum up media support and money support so that there could be an alternate event going on that would be open to everybody, even if Florence was going to swim herself. and it didn't pan out, apparently. Well, obviously. So that was when I came back from Atlantic City, he said to my dad and my mom and I, you know, after your showing in Atlantic City, I have no doubt that you could swim across Lake Ontario. He said, first of all, it's not that many more miles. Of course, he was, you know, he's thinking 32 miles versus 26 miles. And of course, fresh water, you know, no tot, whatever. So, you know, a whole different ball game. But that was, and we knew nothing, you know, we knew nothing about it. My dad, my mom, nor me, in terms of what it would take. So, but he had this plan, and he knew, and he did say, he said, and it would be terribly unfitting to have a Canadian man challenge an American woman. That wouldn't work. That would be that just wouldn't work. It has to be a Canadian woman.
You were suffering all these older men and messing with your mind for years, Marilyn.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he was a bit of a Svengali, I guess, but I think that's probably okay term to use. But however, I knew, my parents knew he would never put me in a position where I could get injured or hurt. So, you know, I trusted him. I trusted him with my life, really, and my parents did too. So anyway, he finally got to the local newspapers, and one daily wasn't interested. They thought that they would get to put a 16-year-old kid in the water in Lake Ontario would just be a terrible thing to do. The readers would have, you know, just really been unhappy about that. So, but the other paper, the competitor, the Toronto Daily Star, they took the bait. I was the bait, apparently. So they opted to pay our expenses. That was the only way we could have done a swim like that, because I wasn't about to take my hard-earned $1,000 from Atlantic City and that was already
and double it on the spin of the wheel.
Yeah. So that's how it happened. And but even up until a couple days before we had met to have our medicals, you know, physical examinations, everybody had to have one, including Florence. And because I was an alternate on the Canada's team, relay team, I had also to go. And that was really weird. I was very uncomfortable because I wasn't one to be involved in any kind of controversy. You know, I never didn't know how to use my voice in those days. I was too shy. And I knew that I would be meeting Florence at the medical, and I was really uncomfortable about that. But she was very nice. We had a picture taken. We wished each other well, and you know, she made it. She was a very gracious lady, and she did get the short end of the stick. Even to this day, I still question whether that had been the right thing. Ethically, was that the right thing to do? I think if I had been faced with that when I was 20 years old, I probably would have said, no, of course not. She had a contract with the exhibition. She wasn't at fault. It was the exhibition that, you know, bailed on the Canadian and the American individual swimmers. But she, you know, she had a rough summer too, because she had tried Juan de Fuca, didn't make it, and then you know, the fiasco with Lake Ontario, and so actually I'm goosebumps just talking about it.
So let me bring you to the middle of the lake. This is going to be a never before done 50-kilometer swim. Let me bring you to kind of the middle of the swim. Gus is in the boat. You're past being cold and tired. Now the other two women have dropped out.
Yes.
As you're swimming, you're unaware of it. The population of Canada is following this. The newspaper is printed in extra.
Yeah.
And what does Gus say to you for this last 20 kilometers?
Oh, that's probably about the time when he told me that Florence was out. And I think I learned that Winnie was out. No, Florence was out. And then Winnie was out after that. But so I think Florence swam for about 9 hours, if I'm not mistaken, and she got very, very sick. And you know, there's no small wonder, because it was the first time I had ever been in the middle of the lake before, and we'd had bad storms. Of course, we'd been delayed we were supposed to swim the night of the 6th, so this was the 8th. So we had 2 days, full days or nights of delay, and I had never been in the lake when it was just boiling. It was the first time I ever experienced when you're swimming and you come up on the crest of the wave and suddenly you're airborne. I had never experienced that, and it was happening in the dark. I didn't know what was going on. You know, it was like, and I was tired by then, and I was like sailing, and then boom, like like a belly flop. And it was, I hated that part of it. But then as time went on, well, other things started to happen. But Gus was, so I think he didn't tell me after 9 hours when Florence got out. He didn't tell me. He waited until he knew that there would be a time when I would need to know, because it would pull me back out of wherever I was, you know. And this in my head, of course, I'd mentioned this fighter quitter conversation that I used to have, and boy, they really chattered a lot. Probably helped to keep me awake, actually. But there was one particular time, and I think it was, I don't know, maybe I had about 9 hours left, you know, going backwards. I couldn't feel my legs. My legs were absolutely, I couldn't feel them. They were numb, paralyzed, whatever. And I stopped and I said, you know, Gus, I can't do this. I can't feel my legs. And I had a pain in my stomach, that I remember, for a good part of the way. And he said, well, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Here, try this. And he gave me some food, and then he handed me a cup on, we had a stick with a ring on it, and that with a cup. So I just pulled the paper cup out, and he said, that's liniment. Don't eat it. Just rub it on your legs. So there's a crazy picture of me in Lake Ontario trying to get one leg up and one, you know, I mean, I also wasn't very good at synchronized swimming, obviously. Oh God. Anyway, you know, I put the liniment on both legs, like he said, and then I started to swim. And I'm thinking, that didn't work. That was a dumb idea. Anyway, I swam a ways, and then eventually I stopped again. And I said, I can't feel my legs. I can't move my legs. I have to stop. And he looked at me and he said, okay, all right, if that's what you want to do, you're sure? Because once you stop, that means you're done. And I said, I want to be done. Just get me in the boat, please. And I was begging, and he said, okay, swim to the boat. What I didn't know was he also had motioned to the boatman, quietly speed up. So I'm swimming hard, trying to get to the boat. And then finally it clicked. He was like maybe 20 yards away. He was far, and I was screaming, what are you doing? I was so angry. It was the first time I ever got angry at my coach, ever. Only 2 times in my life did I get mad at that man. I hollered at him, and he said, come on, swim to the boat. I said, and you're going to move it again. And we're having this argument. And he said, Marilyn, put your head in and swim to the boat. Like he was really mad. He never got mad at me. He would get cool and kind of arrogant, but he never ever raised his voice. So I swam, and then I stopped, and I said, I hate you. You aren't fair. you said swim to the boat and I could get in. And he said, and you said you were paralyzed. Your legs were working fine. Your arms are working fine. Start swimming. And I was so angry, still angry, put my head in the water. And I think that carried me on probably for the next 6 hours because I was just so angry with him. And I hate him. I'm not ever going to do anything with him anymore. And I had all the anger and the frustration came out in the water, but it also flipped me, you know.
So 20 hours and 55 minutes later, a 16-year-old girl comes into the shore. Over the years, there's been a lot of estimates for how many people were there. You want to take your own estimate and leave us with it forever?
No, I don't have a clue because I don't even remember the touch. But I knew you were going to ask me. So I pulled out a bunch of clippings. And every one I found was 250,000 people. You had asked me about that some time ago. And I said, I guess, I don't know. But I know that I was told later on that there was all kinds of car damage where people, they parked and left their cars. No, they couldn't hit anything. It was people climbing over the cars to get to the shore, you know, to the lake shore to see this finish. And I also knew from personal experience, friends saying that there was a traffic jam on the main highway between Toronto and Hamilton, which is about 40 miles perhaps. And there was a traffic jam on the main highway for the same reason. So it seems like an incredibly high number, but that's what the paper said. So
Canada's darling, newsmaker of the year, parade, money and gifts.
Oh.
Still thinking about the lifeguard down in Atlantic City. Your life has changed forever. When you kind of woke up 3 days later, a month later, and you pinched yourself, did you ever anticipate that kind of hoopla on you swimming the lake?
I didn't understand it. It's amazing. I was doing some rereading, trying to get my head squared about, because I didn't know any of this for years. Because I didn't pay attention. I never read the newspapers after I swam, and but I certainly knew about the, you know, this suddenly. Well, to give you an example,
when the house filled up with gifts, you must have thought something was happening.
We lived in a very tiny apartment. We didn't have room for the gifts. We only had room for my mom and dad and me and I think a cat and my sister, of course. So all those gifts, they stayed in a warehouse for a very long time because it was like, what do you do? So the gifts were, I mean, it was incredible. The outpouring of love was incredible on the part of the Canadian people, coast to coast. We had to hire a secretary in order to take care of the mail because, you know, we had tons and tons of mail, and many of the people that wrote a letter slipped like $1 in it or $2 in it, and they were so thrilled. They wanted me, you know, they wanted me to have that, and so it was that the piece of it was incredible, but and wonderful, and I understood because I had read so much about George Young. I understood how he was adored after his big accomplishments swimming in Catalina. So I had a frame of reference for that. I also had a frame of reference every time I saw, for example, my close dear friend, Cliff Lumsden. Every time he had a win, he was receiving the same, you know, the same reaction, the adulation, the congratulations, but it was on a more local scale than what was going on with Lake Ontario. And so I could never really understand why that happened the way it happened. As I've grown older, I think I have more of an understanding. And certainly my husband always said I didn't have a clue what happened, but he always felt that it was that when I swam the lake, because I was a young woman, it was almost like a firecracker going off and saying, listen, you young women, you young girls, we're okay and we can do this. Because that, I mean, I felt that way about myself, you know, or I think I wouldn't have agreed to even try. But so Joe always, he picked up on that immediately. And after many, many years of exposure, I kind of said, yeah, I guess, well, I would get the letters I got letters from kids. I'm still getting letters from kids.
They've named them after you, Marilyn.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes, my namesake, my wonderful namesake, which I hope one day will be an honoree. She was named for me, and her mother, may I say her name? Her first name is Marilyn.
Yes.
Marilyn Krzequa, and she's a dear, dear friend. I love her dearly. I met her the first time she swum Lake Ontario. I think both ways now. Yeah, both ways. Maybe 2 or 3 times I've lost, but she's swum so many other wonderful bodies of water. But I met her mother, re-met her mother about 2 years ago. And when I remember she had told me, her mother had told me when I first met her after she swam Lake Ontario the first time, her mother said that the reason she named her child, her daughter Marilyn, was because she felt that because she had listened, she had been sick with the Asian flu, as a matter of fact, when I was swimming. And she couldn't sleep, so she had the radio on, and she was listening to every 15 minutes, there was a broadcast. And she had said to her husband, they were newlyweds, and she had said to her husband, you know, when we have a daughter, if we have a daughter, we're going to name her Marilyn. And then she told me this story, and she said, and her husband couldn't figure out why. And she said, because I think Marilyn means strength and focus and discipline and all. She went through all these positive, descriptive words. When I met her, she was 99 years old when I re-met her. And I asked her, will you please tell me the story of why you named your daughter Marilyn? Just because I wanted to hear it again. She went through it word for word for word. She said there was never any doubt that I was going to have a girl and she was going to be Marilyn. I didn't know that she'd be a swimmer, but I knew she was going to be strong. And so that's, you know, that's just one of hundreds and hundreds of stories. But getting back to the day after Lake Ontario, in my life changed so radically the day I touched that break wall, that I've always thought in terms of before the lake, after the lake. Joe used to laugh. He'd say, yeah, you kind of mean like BC, you know, and I said, yeah, exactly. Because we weren't prepared. I was 16. I was a high school kid. I needed to get back to school, and I didn't get back for 3 weeks. And in the 3-week time, Life came and did this. Life magazine came and did this big, you know, followed me around for I think 2 days. The only place I was safe was in the bathroom, and I was sure because I locked the door because the photographer was just click, 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 and the whole thing. And then, and then the controversy about I was going to Hollywood, that came up, scared the Jesus out of my grandmothers because they thought they're never going to see me again. And that was a big tutu. And everybody had everybody that had any voice used their voice, either pro or con. So there was, you know, there were like 3 weeks of just controversy in the newspapers about what was going to happen to Marilyn. Well, number one, Marilyn wanted to go back to school. We couldn't continue to live in the Royal York Hotel. We had to go back to where, you know, our domicile was. My dad had to get back to work. And so it was really stressful. And it was like a two-sided coin. It was stressful because I suddenly had to speak to thousands of people in person or on television or on the radio, or we flew to Montreal to a Shriners Shriners Hospital, which was wonderful. In fact, I was just reading an article about that yesterday. And it took me back to the weekend after I swam Lake Ontario. We suddenly flew to Montreal for me to attend the Shriners. They were having a concert, and I was, going to be a speaker, and I was going to get to meet some of the kids, which, was drawing me to this. But I had no clothes. I had sweatpants, my pajamas, I had my bathing suit, everything that I had in Youngstown, New York, preparing to swim the lake. That's what I had in the Royal York Hotel. So they put out an emergency call to a fashion editor for Chatelaine magazine, which is it was a wonderful magazine in Canada. And so this editor arrives with bags of clothes, shoes. We were the same size. So when I went to Montreal to do this big presentation with the Shriners in the sports garden, whatever, I forgot what it's called now, I can't believe it. The only thing I was wearing that was mine was my underwear. Everything else belonged to Rosemary Boxer. And oh my God, I hope nobody finds out,
So you had a secretary, you had a fashion coordinator, you had a publicity team. Marilyn, you were the Canadian hero. You went on to swim the English Channel the next year as the youngest ever. And then you went on to swim.
Do you know why I did that? Do you know why I went? Because I know you.
Winnie Roach told you to do it.
No, Gertrude Ederle told me.
Okay.
Yeah, right before that was her part of her speech when she was mentoring quickly before she fired the gun in Atlantic City, because she was the starter. Next year you'll swim the channel, and of course Winnie had done it too, so that it was a kind of like bookends.
And then the Straits Juan de Fuca, a little bit colder than most places.
Yeah, for sure. And Juan de Fuca was the most important. I guess it was the most important swim for me. I was 18, and I knew it was going to be my last swim, and I knew that a lot of people had failed it. Although by the time I actually got to swim it, Amy Highland, who she tried several times, which was good, but the last time she tried, she didn't make it to Victoria. She didn't make the Bert Thomas route. He was actually the first person. When I was swimming the channel, I think that's when he finally was successful. He tried several times, and he was a wonderful, courageous guy, because he wouldn't give up. He just kept going back and trying. And so he was successful from Port Angeles to Victoria, which was the original route that, people were talking about. And that was the route that Florence would have been her route too, I'm pretty sure. So Amy tried, but they knew she wasn't going to make it all the way to Victoria, but she did make it to Canadian soil. So it's now, I believe they now refer to it as the Amy Highland swim, because it's a shorter swim, but still, it's a swim. She got across the strait. I was planning on going from north to south, and because that hadn't been done. And so I thought that would be kind of cool to do that. And, starting off the swim thinking, we all start off thinking failure's not an option, because we want to get to the other side. Normally, that's how I started swim, whether it was a training swim or, the real thing. The day that was August 10th, just actually the anniversary just passed. And it's always been a significant anniversary for me, because first of all, I had a history of failing as a competitive swimmer. I mean, I don't even think maybe I won 2 gold medals in my whole life, my whole short career, but I was really good. I developed an ability to, I learned how to fail in terms of, dealing with the failure publicly. I was gracious and I didn't whine and carry on. I just, well, yeah, okay, I failed and I have to keep trying harder the next time. But when I tried Juan de Fuca, when I started on the 10th, I knew soon after, it was just soon after I was in the water. Maybe I've been swimming for a couple hours. And by then, you found your groove and you're where you need to be. Conditions were excellent. The water was the warmest it had ever been, flat. And then, but I just couldn't find myself. It was like, I never had that happen before or after. I just could not find myself. I felt unbalanced. No matter what I did, no matter what Gus said, it was meaningless. And then fog rolled in, and the fog, between the fog and the cold water, I just didn't have it. And so after nine hours, maybe 9.5 hours, the only way I could end that swim, I knew I had to end it because I knew I wasn't going to make it to Port Angeles. The only way I could do it was after about 2 hours of trying to convince Gus that I couldn't do anymore. He had put Cliff Lumsden. Cliff Lumsden came out to be there, for my cheering section. So Cliff got in the water beside me, and even Cliff said, "You can do it. You can do it." And I said, I can't. I couldn't even talk. It was like to get the words out. They weren't understanding me. And I couldn't eat. I couldn't keep anything in. I was too weak to even, get my hands to work. So Gus tried all of his tricks, all of his strategies.
Had you chase the boat again?
No, he didn't do that. You know what? That would have been perfect because then I would have just let him go and then he would have realized. No. So what I did was I told him one more time, Gus, I cannot do it this time. And I think I told him that, but as I said, my mouth was, you know how your mouth gets so rigid, you can't make it move. And so I just put my head in the water, took a breath, put my head in the water, and I went limp. And then all hell broke loose. Cliff grabbed me, flipped me over, towed me to the boat, and the headlines were, "Marilyn almost drowned in the Straits." The headlines were terrible. And my coach took such a beating over it. And so the next day, I was fine. Once they got me in the hot bath and the doctor checked me out, I did lose consciousness though, because I woke up in the bathtub on the tug and the accompanying boat, and I don't have any recollection because I said to my mother, "How come you're in the water with me?" And she was just standing beside the bathtub. Anyway, so, but you know what? I realized after that, when I really thought it through, there was only one problem that day. I didn't show up to do what I was trained to do. It was a bad day for me. But of course I felt so guilty because everybody, tried so hard. And so then it was a question of, will I go back and try it again? And I was determined to, not because I wanted more prize money. I wanted to go back and to do the darn thing because I wanted it to be my last swim. So when I talked with, first of all, the doctor, he said, "Yeah, you're fine. You'll be fine. I'll be there," and in the meantime, 13 days later, I did do it. But in the meantime, Cliff got to swim, and he swam the course that I was trying for. So he became the first person and the first Canadian to do that. So it was wonderful. So I was there to cheerlead for him, and I swam with him, and during his swim. So it wasn't that I was afraid to get back in the water. So then when we talked about the repeat, I asked if I've always been this way with, I think, and this was probably the first time I ever did this, but it became a pattern for me. I talked to my coach, but also to the pilot, and I said, I just feel like because I failed going the other way, I need to change. I've got to change something to get my focus back. What I would like to do, if it's possible, to start and swim a south-north route. I know it's been done. I don't care about that. I would just like to do that because I can change the direction. I can change the thinking in my head and figure out how to get from south to north. And he said, yep, I can work that out. So that's what we did. And when sorry, I was sure I shut that off. So what happened was 13 days later, I did it, going in the opposite direction. And from the moment and they had told me initially, the pilot, my pilot, who was wonderful, he said, this could well be just a training swim because the weather's going to break down and we're going to have some really, I was already seeing it on the south side, bad weather, bad water. So just don't be surprised if I tell you to get out. That means you have no chance. So I said, okay, please God, don't let that happen. That's what I prayed the whole way over. Please God, just let me get this done. Let me get it done so I can hang up my bathing suit. And I never batted an eye. In fact, it was the first time I ever swam where I felt like I really didn't even need my coach. That's how I felt in the water. But it was the best lesson for me. And I have used that. Failure, winning or succeeding was wonderful, but wasn't as good as the failure because I learned so much about me. And I've used that, the lesson of Wanda Fuca, every year I taught school, whether it was in second grade, third grade, adult, it didn't matter, adults, teenagers, motivational speaking. I always use that because it really opened my eyes. And I think that's when I grew up, and I knew that was my last swim, which is why I wanted to be,
Marilyn, we've run out of time now, so I'm going to have to say goodbye, but it's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you. We might schedule another one to take you up on how you landed the lifeguard and brought up a great family and that kind of stuff. But again, thank you very much, Marilyn.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Take care.